What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Alright, so we are going to continue our coverage over the Evolutionary War, and now we go with the Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 22. Now, real quick, before we dive into this storyline, I want to remind you what is the Evolutionary War all about. So, when it comes to the High Evolutionary, his big goal in this entire storyline is to advance the human race by doing different kinds of tasks around the world. Now, the only reason why he is doing this is because when it came to him being able to create counter-Earth on the other side of the sun, well, it was stolen by the Beyonders. And when it came to the High Evolutionary, he felt like he had the right to go get it back. Except when he did go confront the Beyonders, he realized they're on a whole different power level. They are basically gods in the Marvel universe. And so his big goal is to take the human race to that level right there, to become gods in the universe. And so that begun the Evolutionary War. Now, when it comes to Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 22, it actually picks up where the Punisher Annual number 1 left off at. And I'll explain more about that as we go on with this story. And really, the opening pages is an example that's saying, hey, this story is being affected by the Punisher chapter of the Evolutionary War, because we do pick up with a few men at a warehouse who are expressing their concerns with their drug operation in New York, because usually they get their drugs from Colombia to sell in New York, except now with something happening in Colombia, they are no longer able to get their drugs to sell, and they feel like their entire operation is going to fall apart. But while you have the men talking to one another, Spider-Man appears, and Spider-Man is able to shut down the entire warehouse in these men. And matter of fact, after doing that, he goes outside to find a police officer to tell him, hey, I just found a few men who were plotting to sell drugs. They're in there and they're ready to go to jail. Now, something I should mention is that this story is also introducing a new character, and that would be Speedball. Now, Speedball is somewhat popular in Marvel Comics, but only because of what happened in Civil War. Either way, when it comes to Speedball, we do see him and his mother heading towards a building to watch a play, but apparently we see that Speedball is not feeling that well, and we'll come find out why later on. But now we have to jump back over to the warehouse. Now remember, we saw Spider-Man tell a police officer to go inside the warehouse to arrest the men that he had just stopped. The officer said, no, I am going to wait for backup and then go inside the warehouse. And that is a huge problem, because while you have the officer waiting, another drug lord goes into the warehouse, and his name is Split-Face Flanagan. When he walks into the warehouse, he kills off the men who were originally going to sell drugs in New York and then take their drugs for his own. And that is a huge problem, because by the time the police officers go inside the warehouse, they find the men dead. And in their mind, it was Spider-Man, because Spider-Man was the one who told them to go inside the warehouse to go arrest the men. And so you had that officer tell reporters that he believes it was Spider-Man who had killed off the man. And so when Peter Parker gets back home to Mary Jane says, you have to watch TV right now. Watch the TV, because they're talking about you being a murderer. And so then we jump over to Daredevil, and he gets word about how Spider-Man is currently being framed for murder. And when it comes to Daredevil, he knows there is no way that Spider-Man would kill somebody. And so his goal is to prove that Spider-Man is innocent. And so you have Peter head over to the Daily Bugle to figure out how in the world this story came together. And so you have Ben Urich tell Peter, hey man, listen, Spider-Man was the last person to be seen leaving the warehouse, which means it had to be him who killed off those men. Now, JJ, he is super excited about this because he can finally prove that Spider-Man is a menace. Tomorrow front page is going to say the same thing. Spider-Man is a menace. Spider-Man killed off those men at the warehouse, and he is so excited. we then jump over to the Kingpin. And the Kingpin is going to be used as a way to explain what happened in the Punisher chapter and how it affects this chapter of the Evolutionary War. So when it came to the Punisher, he went over to Colombia to kill off a drug lord known as El Conte. Now, El Conte was a big-time drug supplier for different drug lords across the world. Now, when the Punisher arrived, we also found out there is a group of people known as the Eliminators, and they work for the High Evolutionary. And he used that group as a way to kill off El Conte, but to also kill off people who do drugs. Because when it comes to the High Evolutionary, if you sell or do drugs, you have to go. You are slowing down the advancement of the evolution of the human race. Now, when it came to the Punisher, he agreed to kill off the drug lords, but he did not agree killing off innocent people who were just doing drugs, who had became drug addicts. And so you had the Punisher get rid of the Eliminators, but he also got rid of El Conte. And like I said, El Conte was a big time supplier for different drug lords across the world, including the ones in New York. Now, when it comes to Kingpin, he finds out that people are having a hard time selling drugs in New York City. But he also found out that there is another group of people that look very similar to the same people we saw in Colombia, except it's not the Eliminators, it is the Purifiers. And the Purifiers are another group of people that work for the High Evolutionary, and their goal is very similar to the Eliminators, to, go out of their way to help their master, to help advance the human race, to purify the human race, to get rid of the ones who are slowing down the human race. And apparently the Purifiers are now in New York, and the Kingpin tells his men, I want to know who they are and why in the world are they in my city at the moment. Now we do pick up with Spider-Man, and you have Spider-Man going back to the warehouse to hopefully figure out what happened after he had left to those drug dealers. Except when he arrives at the warehouse, he is confronted by Daredevil. Now, at first, Spider-Man believes this could lead into a battle between the two superheroes, except you have Matt telling Peter, no man, listen, I believe that you are innocent. I know there's no way that you are a killer. So I am here to help you out to prove that you are innocent. Now, we also have to realize that these two characters have been friends for a very long time in Marvel Comics by this point. And so it's Matt saying, dude, I know you. There's no way you're a killer. Come on, let's go prove you're an innocent man. Now, the next section really does jump back and forth between two different settings. Let me explain. So we do pick up with Speedball at first, and you have Speedball kind of under the weather, and really because of his abilities. They haven't come out yet, but we can tell there's some powers trapped inside of him. We then jump over to JJ. Now, when it comes to JJ, he gets word that there was a poll taken in his own paper. With that poll, it proved that the people really do like the idea that Spider-Man is some kind of drug dealer killer, and he hates that idea so much. And so now his goal is to prove that Spider-Man is innocent, that Peter Parker did not kill off those drug dealers, because he hates the idea of the city being on Spider-Man's side. Now, getting back over to Speedball, you have Speedball trying to go back to his hotel, except out of nowhere, he is confronted by a group of thugs who are trying to steal his money. But it does lead into Speedball powers activating. Now, when it comes to Speedball, he has the ability of a kinetic energy field around him, which means that he is protected by almost any kind of physical attack that's being done towards him. But at the same time, he's also able to bounce off physical objects without any kind of problem. Now, his entire origin is really explained in his own comic, and I'm not going to sit down and try to explain his origin unless somebody asks me to and cover his Speedball comic series, which I might not do at all. But either way, when it comes to Speedball, he does use his abilities to kind of fight against the thugs, except he is able to bounce away from them and hide on a nearby rooftop. Now, after doing that, you do have some purifiers appear. Now remember, the purifiers work for the high evolutionary like the eliminators, except their main goal is to, purify the area that their master has sent them to. And currently that is New York, which means they believe they had to do some purification in New York to help advance the human race. And they start with the thugs who were trying to attack Speedball. Now, they don't see Speedball because he's hiding on a rooftop nearby, but he realized he has to follow them to figure out what in the world are they possibly up to. But then we jump over to Spider-Man and Daredevil, and you have the two characters working together to figure out what happened to those drug dealers after Spider-Man had left. But unfortunately, they are unable to get any kind of information that could possibly help them while they're going to bar to gather that information they are seeking. But then we jump over to the Kingpin. Now, when we do, we see the Kingpin was able to grab one of the members of the purifiers. Now, with him doing that, he is trying to gather information about who they are, but also who is this high evolutionary. Now, this purifier is trying his best to not share any kind of information. But this is the Kingpin, and the Kingpin is going to make sure that you talk about what he wants to know about. Now, getting back over to Speedball, you have Speedball being able to follow the purifiers back to their new base, and this is where we learn a tad bit more about what they are trying to do in New York. Their goal is to use a new kind of system to put the entire city to sleep. And then they are going to pick the people in New York that they feel like are not worthy to help continue on the advancement of the human race by their genetics. And of course, that means purifying the city of New York. And so Speedball is hearing this, and Speedball thinks, okay, I have to tell the police, except when he tries to tell the police, they don't believe anything that he is saying. Now, I found that kind of funny because this is the 1980s going into the 1990s. By this point, I feel like if you call police and say, hey, I heard these crazy things from this crazy group of people, I feel like you would automatically believe them because, hey, you see Spider-Man fighting Doc Ock at least twice a month. But hey, that's just me. But getting over to the Kingpin, we see the Kingpin was able to get the information that he wanted out of that purifier that he was able to grab earlier. Except the purifier mentioned 3 teams: the purifiers, the eliminators, and the gatherers. And we have not seen the gatherers at all so far in our coverage over the Evolutionary War. But with that being said, the Kingpin says, find a way to give this information back over to Spider-Man and Daredevil to help them solve this entire problem, but to make sure there's no way the information can be tracked back to me. And honestly, it works out very well because when we do jump back over to Spider-Man and Daredevil, they go to another bar that's well known for criminals to go to, and they meet a guy who apparently has some information to share over to Spider-Man and Daredevil. You already know that guy works for the Kingpin. Now, the next section is really more of Daredevil fighting along with Spider-Man as they attack the base of the purifiers. Now, while you have the two heroes in the inside of the building fighting against the purifiers, you have Speedball going after the antenna that is going to be used as a way to put everybody to sleep in New York. And so while you have all 3 heroes handling both different situations, you then have all 3 heroes being able to regroup on the outside of the building. Now, I say regroup very loosely there because Speedball did attack the antenna that was going to be used, but then he began to fall to his death, to only survive, but to wake up and see Spider-Man and Daredevil right by his side. And they are wondering, who in the heck is this guy? And he says, hey, I'm Speedball. And that's really it for him. Now I'm going to skip over a few pages and just jump into the ending of this story, which involves the Kingpin. You see, you have the Kingpin very concerned about what is happening with the world when it comes to this evolutionary war, with everything that he has learned. And we are left to believe, the Kingpin believes, that something big is about to happen, possibly in the later chapters of this event. But with that being said, this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.